switch. Oh, that light. I don't know.
This light.
It began with laughter, music, and the click of a record button. At an Airbnb in Baltimore's Federal Hill neighborhood, Ernest Wilson III was hosting a game night party. Fun, carefree, and streamed live on Facebook for his followers. The night was supposed to be harmless. Board games with a twist, loud music, and friends crowded into the backyard, sharing his energy and joy. Ready or not, here I come, he joked, grinning into the camera as his friends dashed off to hide. He had just counted to 30 and turned the camera toward the property's fence. When everything shifted, a shadow moved. Something or someone rushed in. Before laughter could continue, the tone of the live stream dropped into horror. A figure scaled the fence. Who the F? Dumb ass, this can't be one of my friends. Ernest said, disbelief in his voice. Seconds later, gunshots rang out. The camera shook. The screen blurred. In the chaos, Ernest's final moments played out for everyone watching. Friends, strangers, and the person who'd been hunting him. The party had been small, controlled, a gathering of close ones. Still, it was streamed live, a celebration, just a game night with $5 entry and a $5 cover. And in that split second, a private moment became public tragedy, unraveling in a way no one ever expected. When friends first discovered the live stream memories, their hearts sank. A simple game, a night meant for fun, had turned into something far darker. Ernest Wilson III, known for bringing people together, had instead become a victim of violence, and his final moments were forever preserved online. This is not just a crime story. It's a life interrupted. A young man's bright energy sent out to the lens of a camera, abruptly ending in tragedy. It's a reminder that violence can invade even the most ordinary moments. Tonight, we'll walk through Ernest's life, the sudden end of his live stream, the shock waves that followed, and the need to remember who he truly was beyond the screen. Ernest Wilson III wasn't just a name in a headline. He was a son, a friend, and a young man whose laughter could light up a room. To those who knew him best, he was Ernie, a vibrant spirit who loved people, loved music, and loved making even ordinary days feel like an event. His energy was magnetic, the kind that made others want to be near him. Growing up in Baltimore, Ernest was described as someone who dreamed bigger than the block he lived on. He had goals that stretched far beyond the neighborhood. Ideas about business, content creation, and giving people a reason to come together. Hosting game nights, streaming live videos, sharing jokes. These weren't just hobbies. For Ernest, they were glimpses of the future he was carving out for himself. Friends said that he had a gift for making gatherings feel like family reunions, even when half the people in the room didn't know each other. He had a way of breaking down walls, putting on music, cracking jokes, and making sure everyone felt included. He was the type who didn't like seeing people on the sidelines. One friend recalled, if you were quiet, he'd find a way to pull you in. Family members remember Ernest as a young man with a mischievous smile and a kind heart. He had his struggles like anyone else, but his resilience and determination to push forward stood out. He wanted more than just to survive. He wanted to thrive, and he wanted the people around him to thrive too. The Facebook Live wasn't an accident or a random decision. Ernest was testing the waters of a bigger dream, creating experiences, building a presence, put his life out there in ways that could someday grow into something larger. Behind the camera, he wasn't just showing off a party. He was practicing storytelling, building community, inviting others to be part of his world. Those who knew Ernest often described him as someone who wore his heart on his sleeve. He wasn't afraid to laugh loud, to speak his mind, or to share pieces of himself with others. In a city where trust could be hard to come by, he was a rare open book, a person who still believed in connection, even when the world seemed harsh. He wasn't perfect, but no one is. What stood out most about Ernest was how much he tried. He tried to create. He tried to connect. He tried to make his friends' nights brighter. And on that April evening in 2020, when he set up his live stream, he was simply trying to bring joy into a moment that should have been remembered for laughter, not loss. To understand the way of his story, we need to hold on to that image of Ernest Wilson III, the young man who dreamed of more, who poured his energy into others, who lived fully in every moment he was given. Because when tragedy struck, it wasn't just a life that was lost. It was all the promise of what could have been. The night of Ernest's final hours began like so many others, alive with laughter, music, and a familiar warmth of friends gathered together. It was April 2020, and the world outside was tense, weighed down by the uncertainty of a pandemic. But inside that yard, where Ernest and his friends were hosting a game night, there was a sense of release. For a little while, it was about fun, competition, and the comfort of being with people who felt like family. As the games unfolded, Ernest had the idea to go live on Facebook. It wasn't unusual for him. Streaming was part of how he connected, part of how he documented life. His phone captured friends laughing, playing the little details that make moments memorable. To anyone scrolling to their feed, it looked like a regular night of joy in the midst of global chaos. No one watching could have predicted the darkness about to unfold. The camera rolled as music played, and conversations drifted. In the background, people bantered, moved in and out of frame, completely unaware of how fragile the moment really was. The video had the same carefree vibe Ernest always tried to share, a glimpse of normalcy, a reminder that life was still happening. It was raw, unfiltered, and real. But then, in the corner of the frame, something shifted. A figure began climbing over the fence, a shadow against the dim lights of the yard. At first, it might not have registered. Maybe it looked like another guest arriving late, or maybe it happened so fast there wasn't time to process. But in reality, danger had slipped silently into their safe space. What happened next turned that Facebook Live into something haunting. Shots rang out, sharp, chaotic, jarring. The laughter and music dissolved into screams and panic. People scattered, running for cover, while the camera, still recording, captured fragments of the chaos. The intrusion that started quietly had erupted into violence within seconds. Ernest was struck. The young man who moments earlier had been smiling, recording, and sharing his joy was suddenly fighting for his life. Friends tried to help, tried to make sense of what was happening, but the brutality of gunfire doesn't leave room for explanations. Within moments, the night of laughter became a night of heartbreak. The live stream, which began as a celebration, became evidence of a tragedy. Viewers watching from their homes were stunned, unsure what they had just witnessed. For many, the realization came slowly that they had just seen a man's final moments broadcast live, unfiltered and unintentional. It was both surreal and deeply painful. In those final hours, Ernest Wilson's story took a devastating turn. What was meant to be a night of joy ended with a young life cut short in front of an audience that could do nothing but watch.
Lord, dumbass. You thought I got a count out here, stupid. Go the other way. I'm coming to look for you first, girl. 2, 3. Who the fuck is that, G?
I don't know. I'm in your face.
Get your dumbass on the other side of this gate. Who the fuck? Dumbass. This can't be one of my friends.
Up on the ground.
Hey, Todd! Pull that shit up!
It's a reminder of how fragile joy can be, how quickly it can be stolen, and how senseless violence can shatter not just one life, but an entire circle of family, friends, and community. In the hours after the chaos, police descended on the scene. What had begun as a quiet game night turned crime scene, with flashing lights illuminating the very yard where laughter had echoed only hours earlier. Detectives combed through evidence, speaking to the shaken friends who had been there when the unthinkable happened. Each detail mattered. Each recollection helped piece together the moments leading up to Ernest Wilson III's final breath. One critical element of the investigation was the Facebook Live video itself. What began as a stream meant for fun quickly became digital evidence. Investigators studied the footage frame by frame, hoping it might reveal a clue: the intruder's identity, a glimpse of a weapon, or even a subtle detail like clothing or movement. For the first time in many cases like this, technology wasn't just a backdrop to tragedy. It became a vital witness. Friends and neighbors shared what they saw, but shock often clouds memory. The intruder had moved quickly, slipping into the yard and firing before anyone could react. It raised questions for investigators. Was this random? Was Ernest targeted? Or was a robbery gone wrong? The community demanded answers, desperate to understand why such a senseless act of violence had torn through their neighborhood. The broader context weighed heavily on detectives as well. Chicago, like many large cities, was facing surges in gun violence, leaving law enforcement scrambling to keep up. Ernest's death was not just another statistic. It was a real person, a young man with a family and future. But to the police, it also highlighted the challenges of addressing crime amid systemic issues, limited resources, and a community reeling from fear. Legal experts later noted how difficult cases, like Ernest, can be to prosecute. Even with video evidence, identifying a suspect requires clear, undeniable links, something grainy footage doesn't always provide. Eyewitnesses may be traumatized, memories may conflict, and without someone stepping forward with information, cases risk stalling in the shadows of uncertainty. For Ernest's loved ones, waiting for justice was another wound layered on top of grief. They wanted accountability, not just for Ernest, but for the safety of the neighborhood. Each day without answers felt like salt in an open wound. The question loomed over them. Would Ernest's case become another unresolved tragedy, lost in the backlog of urban violence cases? Community advocates stepped in, urging anyone with knowledge to come forward. They reminded people that silence only deepens a cycle of violence. But fear often keeps witnesses quiet. Fear of retaliation, fear of being labeled, fear of standing alone. This silence can strangle justice before it even begins. In the end, the investigation into Ernest Wilson's murder underscored a painful reality, that justice is often a long, uncertain road. It requires not only the diligence of detectives, but the courage of communities. Ernest's death was not just an isolated act. It was a reflection of the struggles cities face every day when violence collides with silence, and when lives full of promise are stolen in an instant. For Ernest Wilson III's family, the days after his murder were a blur of disbelief and heartbreak. His mother, devastated, could barely find the words to describe the pain of losing her son so suddenly, so violently. She had raised him with hopes of seeing him build a future, perhaps start a family of his own. Instead, she was left clutching memories, holding on to photos, and wondering how life could shift from normalcy to tragedy in the span of seconds. Friends who had gathered that night spoke of the lingering trauma. Some admitted they couldn't sleep, haunted by the sounds of gunfire that shattered the air. Others replayed the night endlessly in their minds, asking themselves if they could have done something differently, if they had missed a warning sign, or if speaking up sooner might have saved Ernest's life. Survivors' guilt weighed heavily on them, deepening their grief. Neighbors, too, felt the ripple effects. Ernest was more than just another resident. He was part of the community's rhythm. He waved at people on the block, shared laughs in passing, and carried a presence that many said was warm and grounding. In his absence, the neighborhood felt emptier, quieter, as though something vital had been ripped away. It wasn't just his family mourning him. It was everyone who crossed his path. Community leaders gathered in vigils, holding candles in earnest memory. Standing shoulder to shoulder, they sang, prayed, and wept together. At these vigils, Ernest's name was spoken not as a statistic, but as a young man who had been loved deeply and whose loss demanded recognition. These gatherings became places not only of mourning, but of solidarity, where the grief-stricken leaned on one another to endure the weight of sorrow. His friends remembered him for his sense of humor, for being the guy who could turn a dull night into one filled with laughter. They told stories of Ernest's generosity, how he was always willing to lend a hand or share what little he had. The more they spoke, the more his humanity shone through. He wasn't just a victim in a shooting. He was Ernest, a son, a friend, a brother, a life taken too soon. For Ernest's mother, the hardest part was the silence that followed the crowds going home. After the vigils, after the condolences, the house was quiet, but the absence was loud. Every corner reminded her of him. From the chair he always sat in to the favorite snacks he left behind. This, she said, was the part no one saw, the quiet ache of living day after day without her child. Community activists echoed her grief with urgency. They argued that Ernest's death was a symptom of larger issues, poverty, inequality, cycles of violence that trapped neighborhoods in fear. They wanted his name to be remembered not just in sorrow, but as a call to action. They believe his story could be a rallying point for change if only people would listen, share, and refuse to let his death fade into silence. In the voices of family, friends, and neighbors, Ernest's life was honored and his memory kept alive. Through their grief, one message rang clear: Ernest mattered. He mattered to those who loved him. He mattered to his community. And he mattered enough that his story deserved to be told. Not as just another tragedy, but as a reminder of what's at stake when violence goes unchecked and justice is delayed. Ernest Wilson III's murder forces us to confront a painful truth. His story is not isolated. Across cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia, countless families are left grappling with the aftermath of sudden, senseless violence. These tragedies do not just erase individual lives. They fracture entire communities, creating ripples of grief and trauma that can last generations. Ernest's case becomes a window into a broader conversation about how violence continues to wound America from within. The circumstances of his death, caught between the familiarity of friendship and the intrusion of violence, highlight how fragile safety can feel in certain neighborhoods. A simple gathering, a moment of laughter and joy, was transformed into a crime scene in seconds. This is a reality that too many families know intimately, and Ernest's story is their story too. It underscores how violence steals not just lives, but peace of mind, leaving scars that extend far beyond the immediate victims. At the same time, Ernest's case raises urgent questions about the role of social media in today's tragedies. His murder, following moments streamed online, reflected the uneasy intersection between digital connection and real-world danger. Facebook Live was meant to capture joy, but instead, it became part of the record of his last night. It raises the uncomfortable question: are we witnessing violence in real time more often than we are preventing it? There is also the broader issue of trust in systems of justice. Many in Ernest's community fear that his case, like so many others, may fall into the cracks of an overburdened legal system. Families often face long waits for answers, and too often, they feel forgotten when media attention fades. Ernest's mother's cries for justice echo the voices of many other mothers across America who live with the same haunting reality. Their child's name is one of many on an ever-growing list. Looking at Ernest's life and loss also forces us to consider the conditions that breed violence. Poverty, lack of opportunity, systemic neglect, and a cycle of retaliation often converge, creating an environment where tragedies like this feel inevitable. But they are not inevitable. They are preventable if communities are given resources, support, and investment they need to break free from cycles of violence. Ernest's death, in this sense, is not just about one night, but about decades of structural failures. Yet even amidst despair, Ernest's story also reveals resilience. His community came together in grief, but also in solidarity. They lit candles, they prayed, they demanded action. This resilience is a powerful reminder that communities are not defined solely by violence. They're also defined by their love, their unity, and their determination to honor those they have lost by fighting for something better. When we look at Ernest's death in this broader frame, it becomes more than just a tragedy to mourn. It becomes a call to reflection for all of us. What does it mean to live in a society where young men like Ernest cannot enjoy a simple night with friends without the threat of violence? What does it say about our priorities, our policies, our willingness or unwillingness to protect lives like his? Ultimately, Ernest's story asks us not to look away. It asks us to sit with the discomfort, to see the systemic issues at play, and to recognize that behind every headline is a human being, a son, a brother, a neighbor, whose absence leaves a void that can never be filled. If we allow ourselves to see Ernest not as just another statistic, but as a young man who mattered deeply, then perhaps his story can ignite the reflection and urgency needed to create change. Ernest Wilson III's story reminds us that behind every act of violence is a family left to carry a weight they never asked for. For Ernest's mother, justice is not just about an arrest or conviction. It is about making sure her son's life mattered enough that people remember him, that his story sparks change. Supporting families like hers means more than condolences. It means standing beside them in their fight for answers, safety, and healing. Community members have already begun turning their grief into action. Vigils became not just spaces for mourning, but for organizing. Neighbors speaking out about the need for better youth programs, stronger support systems, and greater investment in communities too often left behind. Ernest's memory has become a rallying point, a reminder that young lives cannot continue to be lost without accountability or solutions. One of the most tangible ways to support is through advocacy. That could mean pushing for reforms in local justice systems, demanding faster case resolutions, or ensuring that victims' families are not left in the dark. Every call to an official, every petition signed, every story shared publicly helps create pressure and reminds authorities that Ernest's case, and cases like his, cannot be forgotten. But action isn't only about policy. It is also about community care, checking on neighbors, offering resources to at-risk youth, volunteering with local organizations, or simply listening when someone speaks about their pain. All of these are small but vital acts. They create networks of support that can prevent violence and ease the burden for grieving families. For those outside Ernest's immediate circle, sharing his story is a powerful tool. Too often, young black men are reduced to statistics or headlines. By keeping Ernest's name alive in conversation on social media and in community spaces, we fight against that erasure. We say loudly that his life mattered, and we refuse to let his story vanish into the endless news cycle. Community support also means recognizing the emotional toll violence takes on survivors and witnesses. Friends who were there the night Ernest died are carrying trauma that could follow them for years. Counseling, safe spaces to talk, and collective healing events become critical in helping them process what they endured. Supporting Ernest's legacy includes supporting those still here, ensuring they don't carry their pain alone. In the broader sense, Ernest's case calls for solidarity across neighborhoods and cities. His story may have unfolded in one Chicago home, but the echoes of his loss can be felt in communities everywhere struggling with the same crisis. By uniting across boundaries, through advocacy networks, community partnerships, and shared resources, we amplify the call for justice and the demand for safer futures. Most importantly, keeping Ernest's story alive is itself an act of resistance. It resists the idea that violence defines him, resists the narrative that his life was disposable, and resists the silence that often follows such tragedies. Through action, support, and collective remembrance, we make sure Ernest Wilson III is not just another name in a headline, but a reminder of why we must keep fighting for change. As we close Ernest Wilson III's story, we're left with a haunting picture of a young man whose life was stolen in the very place he should have felt most safe, among friends, surrounded by laughter. His death underscores a truth that is difficult to face. Joy and violence are too often intertwined in communities that deserve better. One moment, a home was alive with music and celebration. The next, it became a crime scene, forever marked by tragedy. Ernest's life, though brief, carries a weight of meaning that reaches beyond the walls of that party. He was a son, a friend, a young man with dreams, and someone who deserved more time. Remembering him in his fullness means refusing to let his story be defined solely by the violence that ended it. It means carrying forward the image of him smiling, connecting, sharing his life online with friends, not just a heartbreak of his final moments. There's a deeper lesson here. 2. Ernest's death forces us to reflect on what it means to be present for one another. How do we create communities where young people can thrive without fear? How do we ensure that gatherings of joy do not carry the shadow of danger? His story challenges us to examine both the immediate failures of justice and the long-term conditions that allow violence to persist. For Ernest's family, each day without him is a reminder of what has been lost. Birthdays, holidays, and simple daily moments now carry the weight of absence. Yet, in their grief, they also show us resilience. They continue to say his name, to demand justice, to hold on to love even when it is laced with pain. Their strength reminds us that love endures even when life is cut short. As storytellers, as community members, as people who care, our responsibility is to not let Ernest fade into a statistic. Each time we remember his story, we push back against a culture that too often normalizes violence. Each time we speak his name, we honor the life he lived and the promise he carried. This is how we make sure his death is not in vain. It is also a call for compassion. Behind every headline of tragedy, there is a family grieving, a community shaken, and dreams left unfinished. Ernest's story makes it impossible to ignore that truth. By sitting with his story, his laughter, his last night, his family's grief, we recognize the humanity behind the news. And once we recognize it, we cannot look away. The tragedy of Ernest Wilson III is not just about loss. It's about what we choose to do with that loss. Will we let it fade into silence, or will we let it stir us to act, to reflect, to create change? Each of us has a role to play, whether through advocacy, support, or simply refusing to forget. Ernest's story is a reminder that our collective choices shape the world we live in. So as we end this reflection, let us remember Ernest not only for how he died, but for who he was. Let his name be carried with dignity. Let his story fuel compassion, and let his legacy become a call to build a safer, more just world. Because at the heart of it, Ernest Wilson III was loved, and love is always worth remembering.